Imagine giving your last dollar in faith, only to see it fill the luxury jet of the minister promising you rainbows of wealth. I'm Veritas Vox, and today we tear away the golden veneer of the prosperity gospel to expose how blessings became billboards for private jets, mansions, and million-dollar bank balances. Stay with me as we follow the money trail from the pew to the penthouse and confront the scandal of sacred coffers turned personal fortunes. In the 1950s and 60s, post-war optimism met Pentecostal fervor in the American South. Figures like Oral Roberts and Kenneth Hagin began teaching that faith, positive confession, and generous giving unlock divine prosperity, health, wealth, and success. By the 1980s, televangelists like Jim Bakker and Jimmy Swaggart had built media empires preaching that God rewards seed faith investments in the ministry itself. At its core, prosperity theology reinterprets Old Testament promises, Abraham's blessings, Solomon's riches, as universal guarantees for every believer. Sickness and poverty become spiritual deficits to be rebuked, while tithes and offerings are seed sown that sprout financial increase. Critics warn this reduces the gospel to a transactional ledger. Give God money, get more back. But for many struggling amid economic turmoil, the promise of financial breakthrough felt like divine lifeline, until the creditors came calling on the preachers themselves. Fast forward to today, televangelist ministries boast multi-million-dollar budgets, private jets, and sprawling estates. Robert Tilton's Success and Life empire claimed annual revenues north of $80 million at its peak. Yet investigations revealed prayer requests discarded unread, folded into trash bins. Benny Hinn's Miracle Crusades bank on huge donations in exchange for healing anointings. His former chief of staff described a culture where the poor fund the preacher's lavish lifestyles. Then there's Kenneth Copeland, whose ministry owns a $17 million jet, while his teaching calls poverty a spirit of lack. Paula White Cain rose from welfare to White House spiritual advisor on the back of weddings, where couples were urged to give until it hurts, then filmed weeping on camera as God poured out abundance. Each story reveals the same pattern: charismatic authority leveraged to extract wealth, shrouded in promises of divine favor, yet often devoid of accountability or transparency. Televangelists know money follows emotion. Primetime broadcasts shimmer with crescendoing music, tearful testimonies, and dramatic miracle moments engineered to crack open wallets. Viewers are invited to join 24-hour prayer marathons, live calls for financial seeds sown into the ministry. As the host's voice rises, the on-screen thermometer ticks upward. Each donation inflates the promise of personal breakthrough. They deploy scarcity tactics. Only today, your gift unlocks God's overflow. Ringside pastors clutch designer microphones, their tears rehearsed, their gratitude choreographed. Phone banks light up like trading floors. Studio cameras pan to reveal battalions of volunteers accepting checks. The architecture of appeal is subtle. It fuses worship with conspicuous consumption, equating giving with spiritual zeal. In that charged atmosphere, even the most frugal believer can feel faith morph into fiscal obligation. Each dollar cast becomes both ritual and investment in the hope of divine dividends. On the receiving end, congregants grapple with a potent blend of hope and guilt. "What if my doubt hinders my miracle?" they whisper as they open checkbooks. Every past contribution, no matter how meager, fuels a psychological contract. You've invested in this promise, so you must double down to see it fulfilled. Loss aversion kicks in. The fear of spiritual failure outweighs the cost of another tenfold offering. Manipulative language heightens the burden. Donors are told they are partners in the harvest, co-creators of God's blessings. To step back feels like betrayal of God, of community, even of one's own identity as a faithful believer. Meanwhile, cognitive dissonance erects a silent wall, admitting that prosperity preaching exploits vulnerability would undermine years of heartfelt giving. So the cycle persists. Hope begets giving, giving begets deeper hope, and the preacher's bank balance soars on the deferred dreams of the faithful. The prosperity machine hums on global satellites and cable channels. Networks like TBN and CBN beam promises of wealth into living rooms worldwide, their lineups stacked with slick pickups and tear-jerker testimonies. Behind the scenes, corporate sponsors, vitamin makers, gold brokers, even payday lenders underwrite the miracle broadcasts, trading airtime for a shot at the devout dollar. Channel owners negotiate bulk air deals that lock congregations into multi-year payment contracts, turning church donations into guaranteed ad revenue. Ministries bundle airtime with magazine subscriptions and premium prayer packages, creating a conveyor belt of consumption disguised as spiritual growth. The result, faith and finance converge in a fusion reactor of influence, where the more you tune in, the more you're sold, and the less you question whether salvation has become another line item in a sponsor's budget. Every empire has its collapse. Investigative journalists and whistleblowers have torn down walls of secrecy. Jim Bakker's mythic PTL scandal, exposed when state auditors found millions unaccounted for. Benny Hinn's FTC settlements over Miracle, claims that dissolved after legal pressure, and recent congressional probes into tax-exempt abuses by megachurch networks. These exposés reveal not spiritual warfare, but financial malfeasance. Offshore accounts, shell companies, luxury perks billed to the flock, yet each scandal follows the same pattern: initial denials, frantic PR spin, apologies laced with grace, and the sequel crusade, promising reform. The cycle endures, reminding us that whenever faith is commodified, the divine becomes hostage to disclosure, until the whole gilded facade finally cracks. Why hasn't the state shut down the spiritual gold mine? Televangelist ministries thrive under 501c3 tax-exempt status. No oversight of their multi-million-dollar budgets. They exploit vague definitions of charitable activity, classifying luxury perks as ministry expenses. Lawmakers, wary of voter backlash, avoid meddling in religious freedom. Meanwhile, watchdogs find themselves hamstrung. Financial audits are rare, and penalties, if imposed, amount to minor fines. This legal paradise lets prosperity preachers declare tax-deductible miracle offerings, siphoning parishioners' gifts straight into offshore trusts. The result? A spiritual economy divorced from public accountability, where your tithe may fund a bulletproof church bus, while your own wallet hemorrhages in faith's name. Behind the fanfare of abundance lie personal tragedies. Meet Teresa, who emptied her retirement savings after 3 seed donations, only to face eviction months later. Or Mark, who mortgaged his home believing a prophetic word of financial breakthrough. When the blessing never came, he lost both house and faith. Support groups for prosperity gospel widows have sprung up, where former donors share stories of overwhelming debt and spiritual disillusionment. These aren't isolated cases, but patterns. The promise of divine wealth becomes a debt trap, entangling the vulnerable in cycles of hope and hardship. As some ministries celebrate record-breaking offerings, countless families bury dreams under piles of unpaid bills. Proof that when faith becomes currency, hearts and homes can be the ultimate collateral. How does one preach humility from a throne of gold? The very hands that bless tithes are often those that count them in penthouse boardrooms. Televangelists amass thrones of luxury, marble floors, crystal chandeliers, bespoke suits, yet claim spiritual poverty as their badge of honor. In those hushed corridors, power morphs into pride, sermons evolve into performance art, and the preacher's persona becomes the greatest commodity. Transparency dies when the congregation's gaze shifts from divine mystery to human splendor. And so the paradox persists. A messenger of meekness who brooks no scrutiny, whose wealth becomes both testimony and taboo. Beyond the studio lights and on-air appeals lie sprawling networks of influence, alliances between prosperity ministries, billionaires, and power brokers. Political campaigns court these spiritual tycoons for their mega donor lists and voter blocs. In return, pastors endorse policies that favor deregulation, tax cuts, and cultural conservatism. Churches morph into lobby groups, pulpits into podiums for partisan agendas. The result is a cartel where faith fuels political power, and political power fuels faith's biggest empires, leaving the average believer caught between spiritual aspiration and ideological exploitation. Even the loftiest thrones of gold can crumble under the weight of scandal. Consider Jim Bakker's PTL network. Once boasting an $80 million budget, multi-million-dollar theme parks, and global television reach, it shattered in 1987 after revelations of financial fraud and sexual misconduct. Bakker's empire imploded almost overnight. Tithes redirected to offshore accounts, donors left in disbelief, and faith communities scrambling to reconcile betrayal with belief. Similarly, Robert Tilton's Success and Life saga saw a meteoric rise to an $80 million annual revenue, only to be exposed when prayer letters, each promising divine favor, were found discarded, unread behind studio walls. The ensuing outrage triggered FCC fines, advertiser withdrawals, and boardroom revolts. Yet Tilton resurfaced on streaming platforms, rebranding his message with cosmetic changes, while core tactics remained intact. Then there's Benny Hinn. Once acclaimed for miraculous healings before stadium crowds, he faced multiple investigations. From the U.S. Senate's scrutiny in 2007 over tax-exempt abuses, to the Federal Trade Commission's probes into unsubstantiated healing claims. His ministry weathered fines and public censure, but each rebuke fractured trust further, prompting donors to question whether spiritual leaders had become impervious to accountability. These collapses share a pattern: unchecked power, lack of financial transparency, and charismatic immunity. When empires fall, the aftermath is twofold. Ministries vanish or reinvent, congregations fracture, some drifting into disillusionment, others doubling down in defensive loyalty. Yet survivors of these shakeups often emerge with a hardened skepticism. If the prosperity titans could deceive so many, how might smaller ministries be exploiting faith for profit today? The ruins of past giants stand as stark monuments. Faith, weaponized, fortunes amassed, and the very concept of divine blessing besmirched by human greed. In the shadow of collapse, a counter-movement stirs. Voices calling the church back to its roots of sacrificial love rather than financial gain. Emerging leaders advocate a gospel of enough, preaching contentment, communal sharing, and radical generosity that does not hinge on promise of personal prosperity. They draw on Jesus' stark warnings. how hard it is for the rich to enter the kingdom of heaven, and parables of treasure hidden in fields, not hoarded, but surrendered. Small house churches practice open pot giving, where all resources are pooled for communal needs: housing, healthcare, education, eschewing lavish buildings and celebrity pastors. Nonprofits like Faithful Stewardship Initiative offer free financial audits to congregations, unveiling ministry budgets line by line. Their findings often reveal administrative bloat, inflated salaries, and marketing budgets eclipsing outreach. Armed with data, reformers push for transparency covenants, public financial statements, elder-led oversight, and donor charters that prohibit personal profit from ministry funds. At the grassroots, survivors of prosperity preaching form support networks, ex-seaters groups, where former donors share testimonies, counsel one another, and advocate for legislative reforms to tighten church financial reporting. Their motto: "If giving breaks your bank, the gospel has been broken." Yet the road to renewal is neither quick nor painless. Many congregations resist, equating reform with cultural capitulation. They argue that any critique of prosperity teaching risks undermining faith itself. Here, Veritas Vox poses the ultimate question: can the church disentangle blessing from bank balance, reclaim divine favor as spiritual gift rather than commodity, without fueling yet another culture war? True reform demands both courage to expose corruption and compassion to minister to those still caught in the prosperity trap. Only then can the flame of authentic faith burn untainted by the glitter of gold. When an institution betrays its flock, the first medicine is radical transparency. Some congregations now open their finances to the public. Annual reports detail every line: utilities, salaries, travel, and promotional expenses. Members gather in town hall forums, not to critique doctrine but to examine budgets, ensuring that each dollar given advances genuine mission rather than private luxury. Parallel to financial openness, ministries rediscover the power of humble service. Pastors swap corporate jets for bus routes, arriving at food banks before dawn to pack groceries alongside volunteers. Sabbaticals replace profit-driven spiritual retreats. Leaders live on a modest stipend, sleep on simple mattresses, and preach not from studio sets, but from community centers. These acts of shared toil rebuild credibility. When shepherds kneel at the soup kitchen, trust begins to thaw. Sacred practices shift accordingly. Communion plates are passed without collection plates. Tithes are offered digitally, but earmarked explicitly for local charity projects. Prayer services center on healing, not of bank accounts, but of broken hearts and torn lives. Liturgy evolves. Confession includes admitting institutional sin, and benediction sends worshipers into service rather than into inboxes demanding seed gifts. In these rituals, the line between clergy and congregant blurs. Everyone becomes steward, every act of giving a communal covenant. Turn back 2 millennia, and the book of Acts offers a surprising blueprint. All who believed were together and had all things in common. They would sell possessions and goods and distribute to all as any had need. The earliest Christians formed tight communal bonds, not as wealth-accumulating empires, but as mutual aid networks. Bishoprics rotated leadership. No single figure amassed power or riches. Modern reformers mine these apostolic echoes. Intentional communities, neo-Acts fellowships, gather in shared houses, pool incomes, and worship without hierarchical trappings. They reject ticketed conferences and high-priced seminars, offering free teaching circles instead. Elders serve by rotation, judged by character rather than charisma. Their worship spaces are simple: borrowed school gyms or backyard gardens, not marble sanctuaries. Yet adopting ancient models poses challenges. Critics argue that such radical equality undermines pastoral authority and diminishes outreach scale. How can a 50-member house church plant campuses without outside funding? Reformers counter: scale through replication, not fundraising. Small communities baptize and multiply, planting daughter fellowships rather than building mega cathedrals. In doing so, they reclaim a vision of the church as organism, not enterprise, a living body animated by mutual care, not profit motive. When we restore shared stewardship and apostolic simplicity, we honor the gospel's heart, a life poured out for others, not stacked up in vaults. This is the moment of truth. Will the glittering altars of abundance endure, or will they collapse under the weight of their own deception? Prosperity preachers face a choice: double down on the spectacle of wealth, or return to the hard path of sacrificial service. On one hand, the model remains remarkably resilient. Charismatic leaders rebrand, adopt digital platforms, and court new demographics hungry for quick fixes. They pivot to faith-based entrepreneurship seminars, selling courses on kingdom economics and divine branding. Their coffers refill as believers chase the promise of financial breakthrough in volatile economies. On the other hand, grassroots movements gathering momentum threaten to make opulence untenable. Donor-led transparency campaigns, renewed emphasis on small group generosity, and legislative proposals for nonprofit financial disclosures are shifting the landscape. Churches that embrace reform, manning up to audit their ministries, downsizing extravagant programs, and channeling funds to community uplift, shine as counterexamples. Which path will prevail? The answer rests not in ratings or revenue, but in the lived integrity of congregations. If faith becomes synonymous with bank balances, the church risks trading its soul for a bottom line. But if believers reclaim generosity as humble stewardship, giving without guarantee, serving without expectation, the true gospel may yet outlast the Gilded Era. Beloved seekers, we have traversed the opulent heights and the ruinous depths of the prosperity gospel. We've seen how the veneer of blessing can mask a stain of greed, and how genuine faith can flourish in the soil of simplicity. Now I charge you, let your giving be an echo of Christ's own, unconditional, unhurried, and unashamedly generous. Do not measure your devotion by your net worth, but by the breadth of your compassion. Stand with those wounded by false promises. Demand accountability from leaders, and build communities where wealth is not worshipped, but wisely stewarded. I am Veritas Vox. May your faith be richer than your bank account, richer because it is rooted in selfless love that neither inflates nor implodes. Go forth and give as you have been graced, freely, fearlessly, and from a heart made humble by truth.